Well, I better start that from the very start again because I was muted, but it's always good to have a bit of a laugh before we get going.
Mate, you're a ventriloquist, Connor.
I know, it's okay. I've done that with our crypto mentoring for about 5 minutes with a chart before James actually got on the mic and told me that I was muted. So I'm glad it was only a good 10 or 15 seconds. But welcome everyone to this Wednesday night. I'm fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you look at things, to be joined by Warren Black. Today we're going to be talking about everything to do with property and especially the recent rate hikes that were announced yesterday, what this means for the market, what Warren can see playing out from here in regards to not just the property market, but the overall influence this is going to have on the economy and, you know, those on the lower side of the income spectrum, those in the middle class, and then obviously the rich as well. So, Warren, before we really dive into things, is there anything you wanted to say before we get started?
No, just I'm very hurt that you said such mean things about me, but otherwise ready to go, mate. All ready to go.
Excellent. So, Warren, let's first off, let's start about the rate hikes that I was actually at your house yesterday when they came out, and it's fair to say that you were shocked by how fast they went up, and I think a lot of people were probably shocked by just how fast they've been raised. So we're at 0.85% now. Yesterday was a 0.5% rate hike. Were you expecting something like that?
Yes and no, I think is the honest answer. Years ago, about 15 to 16 years ago, I made a statement because I spent years in underground off the grids. I had a very bad health crisis kind of about 24 years ago, which went for about 5 years. And during that time, I spent a few years off the grid, pretty much recovering, studying everything I could, getting involved in off the grid movement and everything, and studying all the economics and understanding the money system and the way everything was set up. And by the time I'd finished doing it, I remember saying to guys who I was part of the movement, I said, this system can't last. And they said, well, no, it can't. And every 90 years on average, systems like this collapse. So they said, yeah, this system is going to collapse. And I remember even speaking at an event in the Hyatt Hotel about this in Perth 15 years ago. And then an international banker who was there, he didn't come to me directly, but he went to one of my friends and said, whoever that guy is, how does he know all this shit? You know, he's pretty much telling what our plan is. And he said, we all know we're heading eventually for a depression or crash that will exceed anything that the Great Depression ever saw. And we're all shoring up our lives in readiness for it. And the one thing that I said about event is, when the interest rate hikes start to come at an exponential rate, that's when you know the end is nigh. That was what I said 15 years ago. So I was more just very reflective when I saw that 0.5% hike. I was expecting about a 0.25 at least, possibly a 4%, but 0.5 was like, wow. Especially when, look, economics, I'm going to try and give some very detailed explanation to this to the best I can, But when you look at the consumer confidence index right now, the Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index said the biggest drop in the last little while, pretty much, but I could find in the last 22 years. Now, every time that the consumer confidence index drops, the housing prices lag 3 to 6 months behind. Yeah, as I explained in the article today in the media, there's a number of very, sobering facts about what's happened. Never before have interest rates been so spiked up so high when consumer confidence is so down. It has not happened, and that you can find in recent recorded history over the last 120 odd years in Australia. Just hasn't happened before. So consumer confidence is like below the zero line now. Lettuce, there was an article today about lettuce spray, which was pictures of lettuces which have shot up 600% in the last little while. Blueberries, I went to buy a punnet of blueberries the other day. It was $12. I was like, you got to be joking me. Like $5 I was paying 6 months ago. Steaks and meats certainly moved up a little bit as well. I was looking at fuel prices have shot up. Now, interest rate hikes, they said that if you have a 2.5% interest rate hike, I'll just get the exact figures for you on the average mortgage right now, because keep in mind that the way they assess mortgages, what drives housing markets is very much to do with consumer confidence and also mortgage demand. And when interest rates are very low, mortgage demand goes up very high. Now, the biggest thing I explained today, but the GFC in 2008, the one thing that they had that saved the world from a major crash at that time, which many believed, including myself, that we were heading for a possible recession at that time, was the ability to drop the interest rates exponentially. They literally plummeted the interest rates 4%, and that saved the economy.
Yeah.
But I don't have this luxury this time. We're starting from virtually zero. Even if we go up 3%, all they can do is pull the 3% back, and then there's nowhere else to go. So you've got that going on. There's been a radical cooling of housing prices in the last 3 weeks, like real estate agents are saying that. In the demand, they've been noting it as well. And you've got also, of course, the Labor government getting in, which coincides. I think that's got people very nervous, especially with Albo making it very clear they plan to buy into properties. So yeah, look, I don't have any doubt the government's going to end up buying in and bit by bit owning a lot of properties. And like I said on the other webinar I did for a lot of our high net worth clients, I just said, look, the government have just got away with a spectacular coercion of human rights with the vaccines. And because people's and even that was in a time of prosperity, people wanted to keep their livelihood, they wanted to keep their incomes, they wanted to be able to keep doing their way of life. Now we're living in a centralized grid system where most people are dependent on living in major cities or on governments. They're dependent for their food, for their livelihoods. Like you think of most professions, doctors, lawyers, accountants, financial planners, mortgage brokers, alcohol, like pubs, nightclubs, cafes, all of them, everything I've mentioned so far requires licensing by governments and certain things like that. You've got banks, insurances, everything. So just about every single person who lives in Australia in major cities are very heavily dependent upon the government or centralised grid system. So the government just have to simply turn around and say, you can only access our system if you do what we tell you to do, like get our vaccines, take our chips in your phones or in your hands, up your asses, whatever we want to do to you. On top of that, unlike the last coercion expedition with the vaccine, people did have more money then. Imagine if in 2 years' time, when interest rates have gone up, consumer confidence, prices through the roof, and governments bring their coercion in, people in Australia are just going to do what they're told. Yeah. Because if you can't make your mortgage payment, you're told that, and especially, I said in the last webinar, people will be begging for the Great Reset. People will be literally getting up and saying, please, we can't pay our mortgage, we can't feed our kids, we've got debts, they're stressing us, debt collectors calling us every day, but it's fine, just tell us what to do. Government says, yeah, no issue, you just got to kind of do your, lock into the system, make sure your social credits are up to date, make sure that you've done all this shit that we need you to do, you got your little medical things just to make sure that you got your tax up to date, and they'll be like, yeah, no problem, we'll waive your debts, we'll waive this, and we'll waive that. We'll bring a universal basic income in for you. They go, oh, thank God, And most people who are fed up with the fact that housing prices are so high, in 1965, housing prices the average house was 3 times the average wage. So what that would mean is if the average wage was say 50 grand, a house was 150. Now it's more like about 8 to 10 times, or even more in some places. So if the average wage, like Sydney, I doubt the average wage in Sydney is 100 grand. It may be close to that, but let's say that it was. The median price in Sydney right now is 1.15 million. So it's 11 times. Okay. So, that's just, and then on top of that, most mortgages, the debt to income ratios are getting up and up, which means they're squeezing people tighter for their finances. So you may be on an income of 150, but have a 4 grand a month mortgage. Now that's pretty high because 1 grand a week, that's almost half your pay. That's like 40% of your pay after taxes. Now, so when you go through and look at these numbers and these calculations and that kind of stuff and what they've come up with, yeah, no, look, it's pretty nuts. So what they're saying is, for example, that the economists are predicting an overall rise in the interest rates from now until May next year of somewhere, originally they were forecasting 2.5%. The futures brokers are now estimating as 3.5%. So if it's a 2.5% increase in the interest rate from when it first started till then, the average monthly mortgage repayment on the median price Australian home will rise by $780 per month or 28%. In Sydney, it will rise by $1,163 per month. Now, If it's a 3.5% rise, which I personally think is more likely,
Mm.
then the average price would soar by 1,174%, and the median price for Sydney would go up by 1,748 per month. Now, do you think for the kind of that most people, like your personal trainers, your friends, your lawyers who are working in firms on 150 grand a year, can afford a $1,200 a month jump or an $800 a month jump on their mortgage? No fucking way.
No, anywhere, like you just
No.
say 25% increase to 40% increase on your repayments. Most people don't have the wiggle room for that these days. And that's mortgage payments alone. We're not even talking about oil, gas, energy. All of these things are bound to be going up this year as well. So, you know, the people are going to be stretched thin at the end of the day.
Yeah. So like I said this to you, like let's say you suddenly realized your income had dropped and you were in major issues, okay? What expenses would you drop? You tell me yourself. Like you have to drop your expenses radically. What's the first things you're going to cut?
Any luxury, non-essential items for me. So probably food out. I mean, if I had a trainer, you know, and I say that as I used to be a personal trainer, that would have been one of the first things to go. Correct. So really anything non-essential is going to be out of the way.
Yeah, that's what they found. So contractors, so personal trainers, people will say, well, look, that's a luxury. They might just join a group class or an online class, or a group class is a lot cheaper. They will, or they might just cut them completely. Businesses, as a wealthy mentor once told me, he said, in booms, everyone gets fat. In recessions, everyone has to get lean fast, or they literally die from their fatness. In other words, they go broke. So in other words, businesses get fat because you're lazy in a time of boom. So what happens is the first thing that companies cut is their contractors they don't need. So when our business ever had challenges, and years ago I went through a very challenging time, I just cut all my expenses of contractors who weren't exceptional. In other words, I actually paid more money to people who gave us great value, like our business mentors and financial mentors. I got them on more than ever because I knew I'd need them to get through the recession. So I knew that my business and financial mentors were critical. I went out a little bit less for my weekly meals and my cafes. I drove a little bit less. I cut back a lot of my contractors I didn't need. I cut like nearly all my contractors apart from a couple, you know. Yeah. So that's what also happens. They cut contractors, cut luxury items, anything like that. So basically anything that's remotely non-essential in any way, shape and form. People start waiting for 8 weeks for their haircut rather than do it after 5 weeks. People do their beauty treatments once every 3 months, once every 2 months, you know, little things like that start happening. So any of those kind of businesses are going to be hit, you know, they're going to be really hit. And we haven't seen remotely the hit of the whole pandemic. I mean, Australia was cushioned because the government were able to slash interest rates and do a whole lot of shit and get away with it. Whereas they're not going to have that luxury now, and Albo's certainly not going to do it anyway. He'll just print money or do what he has to do. So I think we've got some problems ahead, safe to say.
Definitely. And it's more of the snowball effect that's going to happen because you have these people tightening up their budget. That only spreads on to other people within Australia, and it's only going to get worse and worse from there. So, you know, with these interest rates continuing to rise, Warren, what do you see happening within, you know, the housing market? What do you think the response is going to be?
I think initially the same happened with the vaccines. I think most people will just kind of notice it and not think twice about it. It takes 3 to 6 months for the consumer confidence to hit the housing market. And most people prefer to turn a blind eye and not deal with shit. They just do. Like if you get 100 people in a room, 97 of them just don't want to deal with shit. They just don't. You saw that with the vaccine. You know, people were talking about it, but no one was doing anything because they all were hoping that it wouldn't be as bad as you'd think. Yeah. Rather than accepting the fact that hope is a very, you know, dangerous commodity when you're in a time of communism, you know. And the reason I'm so direct like this, or the reason that I'm so like this, is that if you know what your enemy is ahead, you can deal with it. It's like you and I are probably in the best place we've been in years. I'm in a great place because I can remember 3 years ago, Conan, and you may remember when I badly injured my back. Now, I meet people who have the same injury. It still perplexes me. I've just learned to accept it. But these people, I actually want to go and help them and show them how I can fix their back. And they all go, oh, no, I've got this back injury. Oh, no, it's permanent. Oh, no, I've always got this. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because when I injured my back, I freaked out. I dropped everything and I just got the worst case scenario report. I didn't hide myself from the truth. The worst case scenario report was terrible. but I knew I had a chance to avert it if I moved fast. So I averted it and went all out and did 6 months rehab and got my back completely healed and back to normal. But yeah, look, most people I meet just kind of accept it. They maybe go to a doctor. They want to do the easy thing. So it's the same kind of deal with this here. Like, if you know what's going to happen, personally, I think we're heading into the greatest phase of opportunity we've ever been in our life. I mean, these are the days I've been waiting for like 30 years, the days when the society would melt down and the greatest wealth opportunities in the history of our nation would be available. I've been waiting for these days. And so for me, I'm just like, wow, this is going to be Christmas Day, you know, rolled into one. But, you know, if you're remotely not ready for what lies ahead, and if you're living in hope, if you're not dealing with stuff, then yeah, look, it's going to be ugly times. But there's so much opportunity right now if you structure yourself properly, if you kind of take the preventative steps, you cut off your non-essentials, you keep your essentials, and yeah, you just basically start looking for asking yourself, what are the businesses that flourish? If you study in Great Depression, more millionaires came out of the Great Depression than just about any other time. Because people who saw the opportunity, while everyone else was freaking out, jumping out of buildings in Wall Street, they're going in, they're setting up new businesses. Because the fact is, people don't just stop existing; they just change their expenses and change where they're going to. That's all. Like more meaning. Like people will seek more meaning. That's why we like doing spiritual stuff and mindset stuff, because people over the next 3 years will start seeking meaning in their life. They'll realize that money as a pursuit in itself is a very empty, very desolate, very barren life, and more people are going to start seeking meaning. So any business that's going to be about helping people find meaning that really does is going to do well. You know, anything that has a really good entertainment to help dull sorrows will do well. You know, anything that helps, like what we're doing, that's why we do wealth education and protection, that'll do well. You know, anything like that. So you just got to kind of know what to be in and what not to be in.
Very well said, Warren. You always have a good way of putting those things up. So, you know, we'll take a step back, and just for everyone to kind of think about what's going to be happening, let's assume that we see, you know, 2.5% or 3.5% in the interest.
No, I reckon 3.5%. I reckon
3.5%.
Yeah, I'm predicting
3.5%. Let's assume the price of oil, the price of gas, and the price of energy continues to go up. You know, we've got supply chain issues still, and we're already seeing that with food now. So we'll assume that keeps going up. Inevitably, people are going to be racking up large amounts of debt. Was that fair to say?
Look, that's what people do. People generally, they rack up debt. They don't want to lose their lifestyle. They want to keep doing it. They want to keep up appearances. So yeah, they just rack up the credit card. They rack up the debt. They don't pay the tax man when the bus jet comes up to be due, and they just ignore the phone calls from the debt collectors, and they ignore the notices coming in the mail. That's just what most people do.
So it's interesting to hear your thoughts on this, because you actually put this into kind of like almost like a stage plan, right? So these people get into large amount of debts without much of a way to get out. How does the government view that, and how do you see that unfolding from that scenario?
You mean like with the debt or whatever else?
Yeah. So, you know, we were talking about this yesterday, right? And you were saying how easy it'll be for people to move into this new system when they're pushed to the brink of just being in absolute debt up to their eyeballs.
This has been planned. Everything has been planned. Like if you actually go back and, and actually study the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, if you read the Khazarian 13th tribe book and the various handbooks and this kind of stuff, there's a lot of stuff about these societies and who's behind this whole thing. And I remember it took me years to work this out. And when I worked out who is behind all this, and I read their religious books, I read their books and their teachings, I was despondent for weeks. I was like, shit, you know? So basically, the groups who were behind all of this, I can remember, and some of you may remember 2 years ago, a lot of what's happened I said was going to happen, because when you read the Khazarian playbook for a new world order that was brought in, part of it was very much about, you know, you got to melt down, you got to first of all get people used to violation of their bodies and giving up bodily autonomy. That's part of the process. Another part of the process is to rack up essential services prices so people will start to depend on the government. Then break down civilization and cause chaos, because out of chaos comes order, out of order comes chaos. That's a universal law. So you've got to create chaos, and then people start screaming for order. So you can't create any kind of new world system unless you've got enough chaos so people scream for more order. So basically, I just see chaos increasing. I see possible in some parts of the world civil unrest. As people start to realize that they can't feed their families, they freak out. Yeah, look, I think that you'll see chaos come in, and then when there's chaos, people will be screaming for solutions. And I think most politicians are clueless. I think a lot of them are trying to do the right thing. I don't subscribe to a lot of people think every politician is all part of the system. I mean, they are, but a lot of them are there to do good. They actually do want to make a difference. They're just clueless. They don't really have any idea how to function in this current environment. So I think, the bulk of politicians are actually there trying to do a reasonable job, but they're dealing with a civilization that are calling for answers that refuse to be sovereign. So yeah, look, I think that the unrest and the chaos, people will be calling out for governments in Australia. The governments will happily oblige. They will print some money. They will give some welfare. They will buy into some houses. They will start taxing the rich, like the World Economic Forum has recommended, to increase wealth taxes on the citizens. So good chance that Albanese will bring in a wealth tax, like on inheritances or on some kind of on people's net worth or something like that, like they've done in America now. They've brought in a wealth tax, and just start basically getting the money from the rich, moving it over, and then just going to give money away to the poor, and to people who don't really want to work or do whatever. And then the people who genuinely get caught out by this, then yeah, I see there'll be some kind of eventual financial reset of it. I don't know how long it will take to play out. I think it will take a while. But yeah, look, there's no doubt this is where it's heading. It's one of the reasons why we run the Global Wealth Club, as you know, because I do believe that the more we can empower people, you can mitigate the impact of this whole situation. Things like that. So
with when you say those wealth taxes, Warren, is that, obviously there are different ways to hide your wealth, and that's something that I've learned from you. And for someone like yourself, if someone wants to have a look at you, you don't exactly look like the wealthiest person on earth. So with these wealth taxes, are there ways people will still be able to work around those, even if they bring them in?
Do you think the elite are going to pay wealth taxes?
Absolutely not.
No. Yeah, there's always a way around it, there's always going to be a way around wealth taxes and around any taxes. I don't believe there's any. I think the only law which I found in recent times where I really honestly couldn't find a very easy way out of it was the census. I think God drafted the census legislation because literally, I think God, Jesus, and Buddha got together and drafted it because I couldn't find a single hole in it. So in the end, I had to use another way to get out of the census. A bit more clever way of doing it, a more creative way. But yeah, if you understand the 10 maxims of commercial law that came out, which talks about the basis of any legal system, one of them is you always must have a remedy. In other words, every law has to have a remedy. So there's always a way out of everything. In fact, I think in the scriptures and Buddhist teachings, they say there is no trial, tribulation, or temptation that ever comes your way beyond what you can bear. Yeah. So I have this belief that the elite will never set up laws that they're stuck with. They just won't do it. Yeah. So whenever laws have come out, I've always asked, well, there's going to be a loophole, like when the vaccines. And sure enough, when I read the loopholes for the masks, I was just like, yeah, there's plenty of them. The vaccines, they had their own little exemptions and loopholes and systems and things like that. So, look, there's always a way. It's just that most people don't want to do the hard work to find a way. That's the unfortunate reality.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Louise Warren. It says, can you tell us what books you were referring to? I think that's when you were talking about the Khazarians and things, but I know some of those were quite hidden books that you've read for a lot of that knowledge. So are there any that...
Well, let me share my screen quickly. I'll show a few little references because, on that one. So let me just share my screen just for a brief second. Just typing something up here. But yeah, look, for people who are willing to read and do this kind of work, I'm even willing to do a series of videos on this because these uniform commercial laws, common law, and understanding the principles of any legal system, these literally saved my life. These got me through the horrendous systems that we're in now, learning this kind of stuff. The 10 maxims of commercial law, you can always look it up on Google. It's just like, just reading about that. The 10 Tenets of Communism by Karl Marx is very useful to have a look at as well. Yeah, the other one is Howard Freeman, the UCC connection. These are all what I call, and then the other one is Frederick Bastiat, the law. These are all really good, what I call books that give you the foundation of any kind of common law or correct legal system and the nature of remedies and how they work. So that's why, for example, Victoria are trying to pass law stopping you from growing your own food. And I mean, if you just have to read Bastiat's book to know that that law is just not a law. It just isn't. It's just a blatant starvation stealing. It's like if a government brings in a 70% tax, that's not a tax. It's like when China passed a law saying you had to kill and abort children when you had more than one. That's not a law. A law is designed to promote liberty, freedom, and property. Anything that doesn't do that is a dictatorship, and so you've just got to know that. I would recommend too, if you're really serious about your sovereignty, this is a must-watch video. You can find it on YouTube. It's 3.5 hours. It gives you the basis of the financial system. My guess is quite a lot of you have watched this. Is there anyone here who hasn't watched the Money Masters 3.5 hour video?
Oh, I think I watched it 6 years ago when you told me to watch it or something like that, but I'll have to rewatch it again.
Yeah, it's a must watch to understand our money system. And you'll see why we're heading for a major crash. Then you'll see why we are going to go up the absolute, shit's creek with our economic system. Because explain the basis of economics and the correct system. But yeah, the maxims of commercial law and understanding that, yeah, if you can actually, this literally changed my life. This is how I got myself out of all the mandates and everything. Because I lived in the census. By the way, when I couldn't find a loophole with the census, this is what I used. I used this and this as my secret to get out of it. So this stuff is gold. It's just that, yeah, most people aren't willing to do the hard work to go into it. So yeah, if anyone here is interested to do that and come along and watch a webinar like this, I'll certainly do it. If enough people do it. I always enjoy teaching on this. But yeah, if you type in Howard Freeman UCC connection, this guy is an absolute genius. He teaches some really good stuff. So yeah, look, so basically, this is what you're dealing with. Howard Freeman UCC connection. He goes into basically how he walked out of the tax system, and the tax office shook his hand and waved him goodbye. Literally very clever guy. So. Yeah, the nature of so I don't quite know I got this topic, but yeah, look, basically these are my reading list books, and it's understanding how you're going to get out of wealth taxes and things like that and anything. So the point is, I remember with Google, I remember studying what Google was doing, for example,
Yeah.
And I remember with tax minimization, because I thought whatever Google's doing, so I thought whatever Google is doing, then that's going to be legal. Whatever the Catholic Church is doing is going to be legal. Whatever the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I studied all these groups, and by the time I finished, I was like, oh yeah, baby. I thought there's a way around every tax law. There's a way around. In fact, I'll show you something else. Kind of. This is classic. Okay. Peter Martin. In 2016, was a very pissed off journalist who did a study of the 56 richest Australian millionaires, and this is what he found. Okay, hang on. So he found that 56 paid of these 56. I think only 2 of them actually paid taxes. Okay, on average, these guys paid something like $1.7 million per individual to their tax advisors, to people like me. In other words, tax is optional. What I've always said. They all earned around $2.3 million each on average after, whatever else. They all spent large amounts on managing their tax affairs. That they all drove their taxable incomes below the $18,200 rate. They all claimed large amounts of various gifts. And here's the big one, donations to charities and political parties. So yeah, charities, foundations, what I've been saying for ages. Setting up lost farming operations, foundations, offshore. They found that income earners between $500,000 to $1 million, a lot of them were able to do the same kind of thing. Yeah, all this kind of stuff here. And as it says here, the tax office spokesman said there were legitimate reasons wealthy taxpayers might escape paying tax in a particular year, but were more likely to attract the attention of the office. So the point is that there's always a way of any kind of law, And when I went through and studied what the millionaires and the wealthy do, look, and it all goes down to my whole tax matrix thing as well, which I know, which I basically, in fact, I've shown this previously in things, but when you have a look over here, yep. So you can see my screen again?
Yep, sure can.
Yeah, so this is what Kerry Packer said, which I love. He goes, if you're not minimizing your taxes, in other words, if you're not finding a way to deal with these stupid laws, you want your heads read. And in other words, if you're succumbing to stupid laws without question or because you're scared, then you've really got to take a good look at yourself. I mean, like I was trying to explain to someone, going in there, taking your masks, I remember telling this to kids and wearing them. I said, look, if masks really work, I'd be wearing them. I said, I would be. I said, I've spoken to 4 doctors I trust, and every one of them said they do jack shit. So I said, I'm not going to wear a mask to be muzzled. And I said, and on principle, I said to my son, you just don't do it, because the problem is everyone doing it out of nervousness means you're going to get away with this, and they're going to keep doing shit like this. This is what Packer said, like if anyone doesn't minimize their tax, they want their heads read. And in terms of the tax matrix, I've shared on this before. The first tier and the third tier don't pay tax. The first tier fund the third tier, and that's why they don't pay tax through philanthropy. And then the middle group pay all the taxes. That's just how the system works. So there's always a way around every law. I cannot stress mandates. And you know what I say to you, Connor, when you and Sammy would say, how are you going to handle the vaccine mandates? I said, they don't apply to me, so it doesn't bother me. They'd say, what do you mean? I said, well, they just don't. Because in my mind, I'm in this sovereign group, and I'm like, doesn't mean I'm going to do anything silly, but there'll be a way around the law. And like I said, I've virtually never found a way around a law that I can't beat. The few times I found a law that I really genuinely couldn't beat, then when all else fails, I just go back to the maxims of commercial law. I go back to principles of common law and go back to Bastiat's teaching. Because any law which isn't really a law doesn't apply to me. And then I work out the rest from there. And people say, but how do you know you're not going to get in trouble? I'm like, I don't know, but I just trust that the higher law will take care of me. If I've done everything I can to obey within the system and I can't, then the next step is you've got to go to higher law and trust the higher law will work it out for you, and it always does. Every single time. So this is kind of out there teaching, I know, but if you're catching what I'm saying, it will change your life. And like I said, I'm happy to I think I'm even getting inspired to do some more webinars on this stuff. I think probably, some people might like this, Connor.
Yeah, so. I think now is definitely the time, Warren. I think there's no way around it. We're in for some shaky times ahead economically. And these rate hikes are really just the beginning. And like you said, we haven't really even felt the full wrath of the lockdowns and everything from a few years ago, and it is going to continue to snowball. So I think there's never been a more important time to be talking about this stuff. And I think it's really good to see you taking this from, obviously the structure side of things, a very logical way, but also bringing in the spiritual sense and the wider picture of it, because I think that gives a real unique feel about it.
You've got to work both. I mean, this is why with the Global Wealth Club, as you know, we're going to start doing a series of webinars teaching people on the secrets of manifestation to create the life and hologram you want. Because if you don't, the Great Reset's going to come at your ass and bite you. So we're going to be doing a series of webinars on, how to clear your blocks and imprints around the Great Reset. Because before one of the things I was told in the off-the-grid movements was that if you don't change the way you think around governments, and that they're going to get you, because the way they get you is they get in your head and they brainwash you. So you've got to unprogram yourself. And I reckon it took me years to unprogram myself. And one of the things I've realized in running the Global Wealth Club is how many people are still very programmed. And we haven't really done much to help people unblock their programming. So we're going to run a series of webinars to help people do that over the next few months. So stay tuned on that one, everyone, just to help people clear their blocks, their imprints, their programs around tax, investment, regulatory, and that. Because ultimately, this is why the government spends so much time brainwashing you through the media to program you. So the spiritual side goes hand in hand with the physical side. And that's why with laws, I get annoyed with the common law movement who just simply say everything's common law, government's got no power over us, because that's silly. I mean, governments do have a lot of power. So as much as I can, I'll always try and find a way within the existing law. I'll always read them carefully and find a way legally within the law. And 99% of the time, the existing law has a remedy to make sure that their little cronies can get out of it. You know, like Albanese and his friends don't want to be caught up with his laws. You know, they're there for the plebs. You know, like Mr. Boris Johnson. You know, the lockdowns weren't for him. You know, they were for the plebs of England. So, you know, dear old Boris was partying away happily and maskless and having the time of his life, while his little peasant plebs in England were kind of being locked up and doing all kinds of shit. You know, so the elite don't want the laws to apply to them. So they're always going to be generally going to give you a bit of a loophole. There's always going to be an encryption code to get out of shit. But worst case scenario, you've always got the common law to fall back on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well said, Warren. I love that when people question you about if they think they're going to change some of the laws or rules around foundations, and you say, when all the rich and elites stop using them, then they'll change the rules on them. But until that happens, I can't see anything changing.
No, I mean, until the elite, yeah. I mean, can you imagine the elite going, oh, far out, man, you know, we're going to have to start paying taxes. It's not fair on them. And, you know, we're going to just tax all the foundations. We're going to disclose all the offshore companies. No. Yeah. If anything, it's going to get worse than ever. If anything, I reckon you're going to get more corrupt because they want to make absolutely sure that this reset doesn't affect them. I mean, my personal take on the whole thing, the more I study climate change and control and the Zionist protocols and what they're planning to bring in and why, I think there's a legitimate basis for some of it. And what I mean by that is we do have a population issue. You know, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the world is just insanely populated right now. And so, you know, rather than naturally these things sort themselves out over time through hurricanes or whatever else, but they've just decided to play a little bit of God and go, great, we're going to have to kind of cull our population and do whatever else we're going to do. And yeah, and my perspective is trying to, you know, mitigate risks and do all that kind of stuff, but make it look in a way that it isn't going to be playing, you know? So, yeah, and look, I haven't spoken as openly in some of this as I have been lately, but yeah, I remember when I learned all this shit years ago, it was like, God, you know, and I was seeing the whole Khazarian playbook play out. So, yeah, look, I mentioned a couple of books, Marty. So there's the 13th Tribe by Arthur, you know, by Kostler. The other one too is the Learned Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's a really interesting little thing. You know, that's kind of something that was released years ago about their plan, which was not supposed to be released. And the other one is the religious book. If you want to actually understand the absurdity of the mandates and what they're doing, if you understood the Khazarian religious book, it's like, whoa, you know. The Khazarian religious book, for example, they promote pedophilia. It's a holy thing. They don't like meat eating, and that's of course why they're doing this stuff. It's just like dancing and singing aren't really encouraged. They're very moralistic and vegan inclined. And so you noticed in the mandates, they were trying to stop dancing and singing. But when I was watching all these mandates and going back to the Khazarian teachings, I was just like, God, this is just like, you know, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. This is actually happening. All the stuff I read about years ago is actually happening in the real world. I don't know if anyone else, for me, it was surreal last year watching these vaccine mandates play out because I knew this was going to happen, but still when you actually see it, it's a whole different story. So yeah, it's a really good time to just be getting educated and understanding what's going on, not to get afraid. I mean, as you know, Connor, I'm actually probably the happiest I've been in years because I'm seeing the truth. I'm dealing with it. I'm not trying to control something I can't control. The only thing I can control is make sure my own affairs are in good order, and I'm in great order. I've got my structure set up. I've set everything up, and I'm going to help as many people as I can. You know, just go all out and just keep helping people. And that's all I can do, you know. Keep giving back, keep doing stuff in our business, keep giving a lot of good stuff to help people. You know, it's all I can do, you know. I could sit there and be a keyboard warrior on Facebook. I mean, not that I can really do it anymore. I've been shadow banned 3 times in 30 days in the last, I got shadow banned 2 weeks ago for making a joke about trannies. And then I got banned the last time because I wrote a joke about, you know, Jesus whipping the bankers and saying maybe he should go and whip, you know, maybe we need to whip some of the bankers out of their offices. And I got banned for inciting violence. So, you know, but yeah, anyway. Yes, Steve, come back, Dr. Bill. Yeah, no, Dr. Bill's been pretty much knocked out of commission, you know. He's been
so
ruined.
Sad. The people need their health advice, mate.
Mate, I used to write these appalling posts taking the piss out of everything, and I can't do it anymore. Had my balls chopped off, man.
That's how you know you're in a good space with everything going on, Warren, because that seems like it's your biggest problem right now, not being able to troll people on Facebook. Most people are worried about their mortgage repayments, but you're just upset you can't troll people.
Yeah, I'm going to find other ways to troll people now. Maybe I should join a pro-vax group. It's undercover. So Marty says, what do you think about short-term deposits as interest rates are up for them? Oh, look, like anything, you know, you can always speculate. I don't think the cash system's going to collapse anytime soon. But again, I can't give financial advice on that, but, you know, I don't think it's going to collapse anytime soon. But in saying that, yeah, I mean, what we teach at Global Wealth Club is balanced portfolio. So as long as anything's done within that, it's fine.
All part of a bigger overall strategy.
Sorry?
I said just as long as it's part of a bigger overall strategy.
Yeah, you just got to be strategic. I think this is half the reason we're in a mess too. There's too much speculation. Like most people in Australia are living their money of speculation rather than real investing and real business. You know, people will live a laptop lifestyle, you know, and do fuck all work. Like they want to get government handouts. They don't want to get a job in a cafe because they've got to work. They don't really want to build a business that requires hard work, organisation, system, and yeah, and they prefer to speculate on cryptos and get the biggest return in the quickest amount of time, you know. So,
yeah, interesting. We see that a lot with cryptos right now as well. As promising as some of the rates can be, we find people very situated in cryptos alone, and a lot of them were exposed over the last, 7, 8, 9 months when they were.
Yeah, correct.
Marty's tried to book in for a 30-minute consult, haven't heard back.
That would have been an issue. That would have been probably an issue with the forms because we always get back to people. So maybe James or Jasmine, if you're here, you can follow that up, with Marty and get his details.
There we go. Just send Marty a quick email. Support.
Yeah, but anyway, so there's plenty of things going on right now, So we're in interesting times, everyone. And all I can say is just, this is a very good time to be taking a crap load of action, a really good time to be doing it right now. And, getting advice. I mean, I've got business coaches, I've got mentors in all areas of my life, So if you haven't got your structures done, book an appointment, have a chat with someone like Marty, you're doing it's great. We'll make sure we contact you, mate. Have a chat, get your structures, get some mentoring on your finances and things like that, because there are great opportunities ahead. They really are. But as Pauline says, an exciting time to be alive. Couldn't agree with that, couldn't agree at all. More of you. I'm enjoying life more than ever right now because I've just let go of the whole thing. I mean, last year, some of you may know, but my partner died in November last year. And that was that kind of showed me how transitory everything is, and all the things that I stressed about and took so seriously, I just stopped taking seriously after going through a few months of grieving. I just was like, you know what? Everything ends at some stage, and when you least expect it, let's just get on with our life, enjoy it, have the time of our life, and do the best we can to serve others.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Warren, we've done a big survey of everyone that was in Global Wealth Club, even people that aren't, direct members of the club, but part of our community. And one of the biggest things people really want right now was asset protection, especially coming into the Great Reset. So do you want to share a couple of sentences about what we have planned for July for people that are interested?
Yes, absolutely. Look, basically in terms of asset protection, we did a survey, and that seems to be the big thing that everyone's wanting, how to protect your wealth from the Great Reset. And I don't blame you. So we're going to be doing a major event, especially around property. It's going to be around, so basically we're going to be covering all assets, but the main focus is how to protect your properties, because we're finding a lot of people are very worried about their properties and what governments are going to be doing. So I don't know if anyone is like that here, but if you are, just, let us know. If you're worried about the whole reset and with properties. So we're going to be covering heavily about asset protection around properties. We're going to be covering asset protection, Great Reset generally, and just how to really secure. We're going to really go into detail. That's the main thing we're doing, Connor. Is there anything else we're going to be doing?
I think that was the main point of it. So it'd be a great thing for people that are maybe. I just saw one comment here. Unique situation here. I'm awake. My husband is not interested in asset protection. You'd be surprised how common that actually is. So something like this event would probably be a great starting point for you, so you can kind of, start to have a look at that. And you never know, some of the things you might learn might help convey you that a little bit better. But I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, Warren. Obviously, we'll have more information coming out about that over the next few weeks as well. And we'll no doubt we'll be having some more webinars moving forward, like you said, Warren. Obviously more around asset protection, but we've got a lot in the works right now with manifestations, clearings, and a lot of the spiritual side around what we've been discussing today. And that's something that I haven't really seen much of online, so I'm really excited for us to get that content out there for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now we're going to be doing a lot more webinars, over the next few months on this, like free stuff as well as some, more programs and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, look, it's a good time to just get part of a community, and this is one of the reasons that we do these webinars. And I think a lot of you, like, who here comes just for the community and to be part of the atmosphere? Just type up me in the chat if you like that, because we do this because we meet all the time. We have a huge little network to be part of a community, because you need like-minded people right now. So Connor, definitely, Tam, Louise, yeah, look, lots of people. Yeah, look, you're smart to be part of a community. I was actually saying that, I was actually saying that there's a very famous psychologist called Dr. Henry Cloud, and he actually said that if people could learn to be part of a like-minded community and open up about their fears, get advice and help where they needed it, he said he'd be by and large out of business, He said psychologists only exist because people tend to alienate themselves and try and sort shit on their own. Yeah. And that's the reason why most businesses, go broke, because people try and sort stuff on their own. If people came along to Global Wealth Club and got really empowered in their life and took control of their life and learned to be part of a community, learned to kind of listen to wisdom that you're being taught, financial planners, lawyers, and accountants would just about, they would have a lot less business than they've got right now, put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can attest to that as well, Warren. It was weird how we were saying just today in our team chat, when you were posting about all the interest rate hikes and some different articles, that I said, is it weird that I'm kind of excited for what's coming, when most people are shitting the bed at this point?
Look, it's like in trading. 97% of people lose their money in trading, but 3% make a shitload of money and live an amazing life. And 95% of people are going to be messed up pretty badly by what's coming, or maybe 90%. But there's going to be like about 5% who are going to just have the greatest years and the greatest days of their life, So you just have to get part of a community and be around people and take action. So yeah, like Louise, I love Louise's honesty. They're getting despondent about the globalists, but I learned these things and take action and feel better. Yeah, look, we can't control the globalists. The globalists only exist because we let them, and they've been around. But one thing we can control is our response, by getting up there and taking action, and by focusing on what we can control, So Kathy asks a really good question. Like, what are your best tips to stay out of the digital ID system and avoid it completely when they launch it, where they will lock people out of everything unless they fully buy into medical compliance? Look, it's a good question, and it is a big issue. And like, this is what I was saying at the start, Kathy, Australians especially are so used to living on an electronic system, in a digital ID system of some kind, like everything we do, everything from our jobs. Like if you're a doctor, you get licensed, a psychologist. I mean, I remember a very awake psychologist friend of mine 6 months ago. He was very worried about the mandate. And I just said to him straight away, well, why don't you just stop being a registered psychologist and just become a home counsellor? Oh, but then I can't claim Black Medicare benefits. I said, you fucking idiot. And of course, as he told me afterwards, he said, you're the only person that could get away, because he's very respectable, guy. I said, you fucking idiot. I said, this is the reason why they can do this shit to you, because you're depending on the system and taking its benefits. It's a whole uniform commercial code. They get you dependent upon the system and taking its blooming benefits, And then bit by bit, they do this shit to you, like admiralty law, like passport, permission to pass a port. It's basically under a maritime shipping system of law, So the digital ID system, it's a problem. And the best way you can really, 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 really stay out of that system is what I've done myself is to some degree I've just embraced it, but I've set myself an alternative. In other words, I haven't completely gone off grid. Yeah, I get certain IDs, I get certain systems, but I make sure I've got alternate set up so that if they try and do that to me, I've got a ready-made world living outside of that whole system. So yeah, look, my suggestion on that one there, you've got three choices really. Number one is you just go in and get despondent, comply with the whole thing, hope it doesn't get too bad, and if it gets too bad, take your vaccines and do whatever they ask of you. Choice number two, which is the other extreme, is you completely pull out of the whole system whatsoever, live off cash, live off barter, and go and live off grid. The third option, which is what I'm doing, is go somewhere in the middle. I still work within the system. I still get whatever ideas they want to give me. I kind of, my opinion is the best blind spot is often right in the heart of the beast. So I personally do that, but at the same time, I make sure I've got plenty of things set up offshore, through foundations and things like that, to make sure that if they suddenly turn around and say, hey, Mr. Woz, if you don't go ahead and, get some jabs and a few carrots up your ass, mate, we're going to cut off your benefits to all this kind of stuff. I'll be like, okay, see you later, alligator, and be out and be well and truly out of the system. I mean, I've cut back a lot of my directorships. I've limited all those kind of stuff. I've done insane asset protection to the point of ridiculousness now. Because, yeah, I mean, because what Kathy said, I personally think that's where this is heading. Pauline says in New South Wales, a digital incoming passengers card. Yeah, no, absolutely, I think that they will, look, I think this could go very bad. I agree. So you definitely want to be having backups. And like I've got backup internets that aren't in the main system and stuff like that. I'm looking at buying a satellite for my camper trailer. There's all kinds of stuff I'm looking at doing myself. So yeah, so the nuts and the bolts of it is all sounds pretty full on, but keep in mind, we're all dulled to being used to living in a centralized grid system. The one time in history this was done en masse was the Tower of Babel with a dude called Nimrod. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but he set up this new world order back 5,000 years ago through this Tower of Babel, and basically got the whole world under dictatorship and control. And everyone had to do exactly what they were blooming well told. And he did that by getting everyone dependent on a central energy grid system. So how do you get out of that? You've got to break your dependence on it. Learn to, I'm still living in the city, by the way, but I'm building alternatives of sources of supply, and I'm making sure that I've got them.
Well said, Warren. Now we are getting smashed with questions. Were there any more you want to take?
Yeah, I'll answer these questions. I'm in the mood to So there's days I can't be fucked, and there's days I'm in the mood. I'm kind of in these days. I'm kind of feeling feminine, just want to chat. That was a bit of a cheeky comment, but I just have to say that. Warren, do you think the age pension will eventually be tied to being vaccinated? Mate, anything, Frank, is possible, would not be surprised, I'm not saying it will happen, but mate, nothing would surprise me right now. That's why the age pension anyway, according to Bureau of Statistics figures back in 2008, and predicting by 2028, governments couldn't afford to fund it anymore. And bit by bit, they're literally having less working Australians to every pensioner. So I think the pension's going to go out inevitably. So they're going to have to find a way to curb the pensions. They'll either stop it or only give it to certain people. So in terms of Hermina says thoughts on smart cities. Look, smart cities are kind of an interesting one, because I know in Perth they made it a bit more of a smart city with the freeways, and I have to say I like what they've done. The freeway is actually so much better since they made it smart. Like, it used to be a nightmare to drive in anywhere on our Kwinana freeway. So look, I think smart cities have their benefits if they work correctly. I think we should be improving our technology within a big place. But, and here's the big but, I mean, smart cities are also centres of great control where they can cause a lot of damage, and so hence you just got to make sure you've got alternative plans if it gets bad. And, there's every likelihood that smart cities will turn into microchip control centres, I think it's very possible. So, yeah, Kathy says the globalists had no idea how community exploded as it has. That's why they'll go further to disable our ability. I don't know. I think they did. I think that I think this thing's been fairly well planned, and I think they expected a lot of this. I personally think things have gone spectacularly according to plan so far for the globalists. I'm a little bit of a contrarian like that, and I was actually astonished how little people pushed back. Myself, I was the opposite, Kathy. I thought people would push back a little more than they did, and I was the most pessimistic person that I know. But I did think that people would wake up a little bit more than they did, and I'll be very transparent with everyone. 3 months ago, I went through about a 30-day period. I was pretty despondent. I was in a bit of a dark place because I was just like, I cannot believe the absolute ignorance of our population. I've got no idea what to do from here. I mean, is anything I do even making a difference? I went through 30 days of that, and it wasn't a pity party. It was a genuine question. Am I actually making a difference? I mean, people aren't really awakening. Maybe I'm not making any difference, but then fortunately, a lot of you lovely people send me these beautiful comments on Telegram and send these really nice stuff to me. And then I thought, okay, well, I may not be making a difference in the masses, but there seems to be enough people that, we're making a difference in that. Yeah, let's just keep on with the path. Let's just keep helping people the best we can. So yeah, look, I think this thing's been very well planned. And I know that because 20 years ago, I learned the plan. I was teaching at the Hyatt Hotel, and everything I taught in the Hyatt Hotel was what's played out. So, and they were expecting a pushback of some level. So Amber says, what's the general cut-off in dollar income amount to make a foundation setup worthwhile? Oh, yeah, look, generally, it depends on the kind you're setting up, but yeah, look, you generally want a reasonable amount of money. It costs quite a bit to set one up properly. So, so generally you want to be hitting the 200-300 grand a year income, as a general rule. But either that, or you got a reasonable amount of money, like a $1 or $2 million, bit of a asset base. But in saying that, I have had people set up with less than that. So, but that's a bit of a ballpark.
Yeah, I like what Aidan says there, making it different to those that want it.
Yeah, that's actually what we came up with. Kind of remember, I said to our team, I said, what we're going to focus on is helping those who really are willing to help themselves. So those in Australia who really will help themselves, we're going to do whatever we can to help with our free. We're going to set up great programs and, great business that's going to make a difference, as well as a great philanthropic. Those who don't want to help themselves, they can go and give their ass to Bill Gates and, whatever else they want to do,
Just not the Facebook Dr. Bill. Don't go to that one.
No, I still makes me laugh. That's when I had one of my family members, at one time someone was silly enough to try and take me on the vaccine debate and tried to kind of suggest that maybe I should just do it. And, I just said to them, I said, look, I couldn't agree with you more. They said, really? I'm like, yeah. I said, look, I don't see any point personally why people should be resisting it. I mean, why people just do whatever the government tells them, whenever the government wants to do shit to them. I personally think our bodies should be the property of the government. They should just do what they want to us. And that's all I said. And they could just see they're sitting there, their head spinning, going, I don't know about that. And I'm saying, that's what you're saying. I said, government should be able to coerce vaccines. So, yeah, I think people should just turn up and give their bodies. And I'm like, in Wuhan, China, basically they actually anal swab people. Did you know that? And she says, no. And I said, yeah. They said, they don't like doing the nose swabs because they reckon the ass is more accurate. So I said, personally, I really hope they bring it to Australia. I said, I want more accurate testing. I said, I hope you're willing to give your ass to your, to the government. You're like, well, I don't want to get something shoved up my ass. I said, don't be a baby. I said, your body belongs to the government. I said, you should just give your ass and let them shove it up there, I said,
especially when it's for the greater good, right?
Yeah, I said, look, I'm happy to give my anal virginity up to the chief health officer. I said, I was hoping you give it up for someone special, but, I'll make an exception. And that literally ended the debate. No one has ever came near me after that from the family on the vaccine. I think I just appalled everyone. So it was pretty fun.
You're an appalling individual by nature, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it's like what I did yesterday. We won't tell what we did to our team meeting, but one of my sons had this really appalling idea to do, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. So generally there's this statement that people come up with these really bad ideas, and then I'll say, I'll put my hand up and say, yeah, I'll do it. So.
Oh, it's a good laugh. Really good laugh.
Yeah, you got to have fun, and it's the best way you're going to get through this whole time. And this is what I've been doing, is I got too serious for a while. I got pretty depressed about the whole thing, and I'm just having fun again, but I keep working my ass off and to not basically, but having fun. Like, getting in community, coming along to webinars, talking like we do this every day. I'm talking to people daily, so.
No, it's great. You can see how alive and how energized you are by stuff like this as well, Warren. So it's good to see.
I enjoy it. Yeah, it's good fun.
Anything else to add before we wrap up for today, Warren?
No, look, come along to the event. Look, the biggest thing I encourage people to do is we're going to be doing this event in July. We keep our event costs very, very affordable deliberately to make sure that everyone can come. But yeah, what we also do, it's for our really best stuff like that, obviously for our high level teaching, when we've got speakers coming, we keep our costs relatively affordable. We want to make sure that the event is really going to give you high quality asset protection. Look, if you value your wealth, they actually say in the high net worth, you should be putting about 5% of your money aside, to protect your wealth. So really encourage everyone to come to the event. I don't know if we've got a link yet for the event, but if
sure
we
that's
don't,
a question for James.
If we don't, we'll just give it next week.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, we actually haven't planned for. Nope, James says we don't have a link yet. We haven't planned to do some more of these, Warren, but we'll be here next Wednesday. I'm assuming at the same time anyway. It'll be some topic, like we said, we're not quite sure right now. Pauline says in Sydney with a question mark. Nope, it will be in Perth, but we will be broadcasting it online if you are referring to the event, Pauline. Beautiful. Well, thanks for your time today, Warren. And obviously having a chat about the housing markets and things like that. For everyone, stay tuned. You'll get some more email outs for the links next week. Like I said, I'm not sure exactly what myself and Warren will be talking about, but it feels like there's new stuff to talk about every week with the way the world is going. So we'll definitely be back here next Wednesday, 5:30 Australian Western Standard Time. So make sure you set the time aside. And then we'll see you there. Warren, once again, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for giving the information to everyone. Any final thoughts before we close up?
No, look, just like I said, keep coming along, keep having fun. For those of you who are in the Ignite program, come along to our Thursday one tomorrow night. And just keep, just keep having fun and take plenty of action in the meantime. I cannot emphasize enough, and keep taking action daily or weekly because things are changing daily and weekly. And the only other thing I'll mention is keep your health in really good state, like eat really well, get regular homeopathy or other checkups or whatever, exercises, whatever else, because you really want to be looking after your health at this time. I think that the health system's going to break down pretty badly. Yeah. So that's more like a little bit out there, but yeah, it's a big one I mentioned right now.
No, it's a good one to, and I thought that, I can't remember who said, but they said if you're plugged to the system, you might not be able to get access to, the Medicare system and things like that. I think that's why it's important to actually manage your health. And obviously health's a big priority for me. Used to be a PT, but if you want to empower yourself, because if you're pushed into a corner where you need something like that for your own health, you're not really going to have many options at that stage. So health and asset protection are up there with two of the most important things you could look after.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks, Warren. I will see you tomorrow. We'll see the rest of you lovely people either tomorrow in the Thursday Ignite meeting or next Wednesday. So thanks everyone for joining us. Keep your eye peeled on the email for the link for next week, and we will see you on the Wednesday.
Okay. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks, Warren. See you, mate.
Thanks, everyone. See you, man.